bit different. Nick has started to embrace reading as a way to learn more about maybe the experiences that other people have felt that have been in his position or are his age. And those experiences are really helping him navigate his life in a more balanced way, in a healthier way. And he has his longtime friend Kobe by his side to kind of help him work through his life. And so some of the things that students might be interested in doing alongside reading a book like Booked is maybe exploring, their own experiences with the kinds of tensions and situations that are presented in the story. This book does an amazing job of bringing a universality to issues of changes in family structure, in dealing with bullying, in those interpersonal relationships in middle school. I'll turn it over to Barbara.
All right. Well, we don't want to leave out high schoolers when we think about using graphic novels in our classrooms. One of the most popular books for older students is the one I want to feature today, One Dead Spy, the first volume of Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. This book is a graphic version of the story of real Nathan Hale, the first American spy to be executed by the British during the Revolutionary War. The book was written by another Nathan Hale who lived 200 years later than the original one. And I'm sure there's a story there, but we won't have time to go into that. So, according to what we've read in our history books, the older Nathan Hale was a member of Knowlton's Rangers, the very first intelligence service of what became the United States. In September 1776, Hale was commissioned to go undercover, disguised as an out-of-work school teacher, but was captured and convicted of spying. On September 21st, Hale was hanged. It was later reported that before death, he uttered the now famous words, or some version of them, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." But what if, whoops, a little too far, there we go. What if Hale didn't die quite like the story we've always read? What if the story went a little differently? That's the premise of the book. In this version of the story, still not ready for that one yet, sorry. Just as the hanging is about to take place, the officer in charge realizes he has forgotten the orders for the execution and walks away to get them. The hangman, who plays a major comic role in this version, strikes up a conversation with Hale. Suddenly, a big eagle descends, landing on Hale's shoulder. There's a loud crack and rumbling and shaking, and the gallows floor becomes a huge book that snaps shut on Hale. Not the story we were told, was it? We are shown the name of the book, The Big, Huge Book of American History, which, of course, is really future history for the most part. The book opens, and Hale emerges and explains that his last words were in the book. And the rest of this graphic novel is Hale's sharing of stories about how the war actually turned out. Now you can hit that button, Kate. One of my concerns as students progress into high school is that knowledge domains become increasingly siloed. Students' knowledge becomes more and more disconnected across the content areas. Because of this, I encourage teachers within any content area to make an effort to help students reach across the artificial boundaries between the content areas. So I will share with you some ways to make those connections with One Dead Spy. For example, no matter what kind of class you're using this book in, it is appropriate to draw attention to the literary devices the author uses, which is obviously an ELA connection. In this book, humor plays a major role. There are many different techniques to include humor, and several are here in this book, but I will draw your attention to a couple. This page, for example, takes place right after the eagle and the huge book disappear in a poof. Immediately in the bottom right panel that I'm pointing to, we see the officer returning, saying, "I found the hanging orders. Did I miss anything?" A marvelous example of irony. Next page. Is it possible? Well, I'm sorry. I'll highlight a second example from page 26. Hale is sharing the American version of the Boston Massacre, which had occurred a few years earlier. Hale and the officer disagree on whose fault it was, with the officer complaining that the people threw rocks, requiring more soldiers to be called in. In the highlighted panel, the officer says, "And you started whining about being your own country." Then, clearly mimicking the rebels, hands in the air, he says, "Ooh, we're so independent." Definitely sarcasm. So, is it possible to make a connection to science with this book? Maybe even chemistry? Yes, I think so. On page 107, which depicts Hale being interrogated by his captors, the evidence against him are the written notes he made, as shown in the upper right panel. Hale would have been better off if he had used a technique that was common among spies during the Revolutionary War, the use of invisible ink with which to write their secret notes. A little bit of research by your students could result in a chemistry competition to see who could come up with the best formula for making invisible ink. The connection to social studies seems obvious, but although One Dead Spy is a clever and hilarious story, it is fictionalized, and there's a lot about Nathan Hale it doesn't tell. If you use this book in a social studies U.S. history class, I suggest creating literature circles around multiple formal biographies of Hale, such as the Phelps version. It's an acclaimed version depicted on this slide. After the students complete the books, have them report to the class how well One Dead Spy does in telling Hale's tale. Say that 3 times in a rush, and come to a conclusion as to whether and why it's important that we even learn about it. Are you skeptical that we can connect One Dead Spy to math? How about this? In a treatise on American forests called The American Canopy, we learned that the masts mounted on British sailing ships were made of the tall pines of North America's pine forests of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, etc. A situation that ultimately helped reduce the size of those forests dramatically. Surprised that the British show of force in 1775 and 1776 had not had its desired effect, the British doubled down, sending, as the officer says, the quote, largest invasion force in England's history, end quote. On page 69 of One Dead Spy, we find a graphic representation of all the British ships that were sent to North America. 30 heavy battleships, 300 frigates, brigs, transports, and supply ships. In an effort to connect math in a practical way, I would ask students to calculate how many New England pines would have had to have been cut to provide masts for all these ships. Once the calculations are done, you can lead a discussion as to what the impact of creating Britain's great Royal Navy really was. How can we use math to deal with practical problems? So there you have it. Using One Dead Spy to connect English language arts, science, social studies, and math all in one fell swoop.
So we do have a list of some resources for graphic novels, different age groups, for different purposes. Barbara, Maribeth, do you want to say anything else here?
It is a broad-ranging list that we've put together over the last 4 or 5 years, I guess. We hope to develop a more fitted list in the future, so stay tuned.
And then here is our references page with the texts that were discussed and any other supporting texts. I've also included a link to the SEL, CASEL's SEL frameworks, competencies, standards, and guidelines. And you can get this presentation if you scan the QR code down here in the lower right-hand corner. And again, if you're interested in the Facebook group, you can scan the QR code in the upper left-hand corner. So we'd like to open it up for questions at this point.
One of the first ones is what attracted you to the books that you chose to present here? And Barbara, I'll start with you.
Well, One Dead Spy is a book I've been hearing about ever since I got into graphic novels. And, I was a history major, back in the eons past for my undergrad. But I'm an amateur historian and continue to work in that. So, but I kept putting off getting into that particular book because I was afraid I would be disappointed. But when I finally did, I just literally fell in love with it. It is so funny, but it's also quite accurate in not obviously in, Hale coming back and having this conversation with the officer and the hangman, but in how they present not just the history, but interesting side bits of the history of the Revolutionary War. I think it's a terrific book.
Real quick, I want to, Danilo Balin has asked if you could post the URL into the chat. Apparently.
Yes, I can. Yeah. I think it's the last thing I pasted, so let me just try that out.
Oh, and just a quick follow-up, Barbara. Nathan, the reason why he chose that, I actually know him, is because it's his namesake, and he was always kind of fascinated about that kind of history. And one of the woman who drives our research committee, Ashley Delacqua, she's teaching at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and she ran a program, a test case in the school district there in Albuquerque, where they used the George Washington story. And all of those things, all those elements you talk about, what was wonderful, and it drove the results that they had not anticipated on magnitude. But another part that's hilarious is that he blames any possible errors on his research babies. And it's these characters he developed as he started getting into this. And now those research babies have their own fan club. But it's just really his curiosity about how these things came together that really informs those books. Maribeth, what about you with your book?
Well, I want to say real quick, not so much about the book, but Ashley, we are kind of Ashley fangirls. Ashley was one of the first researchers that we began to follow when we started getting into graphic novels. We were lucky enough to have Ashley take part in a graphic novel book club for the Nat, and the recording is online. She came and joined us for a discussion about The Arrival by Sean Tan. But we chose this new book. It was a brand new book, and I will tell you truthfully, I follow a lot of graphic novel artists and writers on Twitter and Instagram, and Colby Sharp, who has written a couple of different books. One is about library classrooms with Donna Lynn Miller. Colby Sharp posted out, I don't remember if it was his blog or whether he tweeted it, about his classroom was madly in love with this book, and that it was very popular, and he couldn't keep it on the shelf, whatever. And we were looking for a book that was a little bit younger age level than what we'd been covering in book clubs, and this one came out, and you really need to read it. It's kind of like the Nathan Hale. It's full of humor. I didn't cover any of the humor at all, but it's got a lot of little innuendos in there that you would really enjoy. But that's how we picked that one. Colby Sharp, follow him.
Have you guys read Pilkey's any one of the Dogman books?
Yes.
Talk about slipping humor in, and maintaining that humor for that many pages is amazing. There's a talent there that he spent most of his life out in the hallway and not in the classroom. He admits that, but it sure has paid off. It's wonderful to be able to read that book that a kid would appreciate, but that we as adults get to have fun with. All right, Kate, talk about your choices.
So I am the green one here with graphic novels, and we read booked in our book club, and I just found it was very sort of endearing to me. I just felt like I was reading the life. I have two male sons, and reading their lives in the experiences of Nick Hall. And this, idea that how does anyone ever survive middle school just kind of haunted me all the way through the reading of it. It reminded me of, I don't know if anyone's ever listened to the This American Life. I think it's called Middle School podcast, and you hear from a principal and teachers and students reflecting back on their experience in middle school. So it just kind of, I really love to consume those things, because I just feel like, someone has to love those kiddos, but nobody enjoys that time of our life. And it just really kind of captured that, and also gave that opportunity to have some transparency about the things we struggle with in middle school in a safe way, hopefully, if we create that environment for students to be able to have those conversations. I happen to be the STEM person in the group, and I did not see this science and math connections in a way that didn't feel forced. And I would say that middle schoolers would be the first ones to harass you or
Call you out.
Yes, if you tried to force those pieces into the content. And so I decided not to try to do that. We talked about some options, but I just felt like it wasn't true to the story. So that's kind of why I settled more on the SEL standards as the integration.
The biggest challenge I ever had as a speaking engagement was 300 seventh graders. I've been in front of big rooms of PhDs, educators of all stripes, librarians. No, it was those seventh graders. I was totally embarrassed. It was awesome. It was such a great experience. Yeah, because their awareness of everything around them suddenly has exploded, right? And they don't have an edit button, and they're going to ask you the questions that make most parents nervous, which is awesome too. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're there on time. If there's anything else that you guys would like to add, or please feel free.
I would just like to say thank you so much. The other sessions have been really amazing, and I'm honored to be a part of this conference. So
I second that.
We're glad to have you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. All right, we have so much more to go. All of these panels are being recorded and saved. So be sure if you missed anything, you can go ahead and rewind. Their contact information is on that final page there as well. Thank you again, you guys. Really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.